Hey YouTube, it's the DFSR crew. We are about to record our game-by-game breakdown for Week 16 in the NFL. So I'll kick it to Doug and he'll get us started.
Three, two, one. All right, you're back in the DFSR. It's an NFL podcast. It's Friday. It's December 21st. I'm Doug Norrie. That is.
James Davis.
Buddy, we're going to break down game by game for week 16. Only 2 weeks of NFL regular season left here. Does it feel like we're sprinting toward the finish? Do you think we crawled toward the finish? When you live in a world of sports cycles, which we basically do, it's always like sort of jumps up and surprises me when a season is almost over. How do you feel as we wind down the NFL season? Do you think it's one of those ones where like we're going to be kind of picking stuff out of a hat here because it's late in the season? Do you think you have a pretty good handle on what's going on? We have 2 weeks left to go, and then we have the playoffs, obviously.
I think I have a pretty good handle on this week. I think trying to look forward to next week, I could see things getting a lot murkier. It's just that there's still so many teams that are still playing for stuff, and that just tends to be, and of course the teams that are playing for things tend to be the ones that don't suck. So that tends to be where the good players are and stuff. But yeah, in the AFC, I'm really only seeing, and I haven't gone and like done the team by team what they need to get into the playoffs thing just yet. But you have Baltimore in the playoffs at 8-6, and then you have two more 8-6 teams. You have a 7-7 team, 6-7-1 team. Like there's just a lot of teams that are still viable. So it's a lot less set in stone than it has been in the past, and that's got to be good for us for DFS purposes, because the worst thing that can happen to you in football is you just lose minutes or opportunity. And the NFC no different, by the way. You still have two 7-7 teams on the outside looking in, and then Carolina at 6-8. So you're not missing too much there either.
Yeah, we're going to roll through the main slate of games here. Skip over Saturday. If you want to get projections and optimal lineups for the Saturday slate of games, it's actually it looks like a pretty good one in terms of just fantasy production, especially with Tennessee as big favorites. You got a decent game with the Ravens and the Chargers. Go over to dfsr.com/deals and just grab a free trial, and that'll give you optimal lineups for those slate and main slate as well. So dfsr.com/deals give you that, but we're going to skip over the Saturday games and just roll into the main slate. We did do a cash game breakdown podcast. We'll nod to some of the guys that we discussed there yesterday. That we spent a lot of time going position by position, kind of just breaking down. I think some of the positions are more obvious than others. There has been news that's come out since we recorded that podcast, which we're going to nod to as well, concerning the Patriots and some other injury stuff that we'll try to wade through. So we'll go through these game by game, take a look at just kind of where our projections are landing for each one. The first one, there's been a bunch of line shifts in this game. Green Bay goes in and plays the Jets. The line started with Green Bay as a favorite, then instantly shifted to the Jets as a favorite, and then Aaron Rodgers said he's going to start, then instantly went back to Green Bay being road 3-point road favorites. We've talked about this before, but the only position really in the NFL, really more than any other sport, probably except for baseball pitcher, that can swing a line so drastically is the quarterback, and we saw that. We just saw almost like in real time play out with Rodgers. Injury news here, obviously for Green Bay, is Aaron Jones is on the IR. Looks like Jamal Williams will be the primary back. He's been not all that effective at times, but we did not talk about him from a cash game perspective yesterday because I think there's better options. But where do you land on a guy like Jamal Williams? Maybe we're talking GPPs. It looks like he's probably just going to get the bulk of the running back snaps here for Green Bay.
I think I can play Jamal Williams. I think when we've looked, for the same reason we've played Aaron Jones in the past, right? I mean, Jones was used more often in the passing game, and I think you'd like to see that. But in close games or games where Green Bay's ahead, you can see 20-plus running back touches, and Williams still being priced like a backup means that you can get some value there. So I would need to see what we would actually get from it, because it's not without risk. Like, I don't think he's one of these slam dunk, super chalk fill-in guys that you've seen in the past, like, the first week of Spencer Ware when Kareem Hunt went down or something like that. But I still think he's playable. I think a lot of people are going to consider it. I guess the issue I have right now, is for my cash game purposes anyway, is that I'm really liking these like mid-range running backs that we have, and the high-end one in Zeke that feels like a must for cash. So I think that's why Williams wound up not quite making it into the cash game picks.
Yeah, and what you like to see out of Williams, 5 targets in the passing game last week, 12 rushes for 55 yards. That was one of his actually better games. Did score a touchdown. Jets defense is worse against the run this season, so if you're looking for a place to exploit, just the offense here in terms of like what the Jets don't do as well, that's a spot to do it. The passing game, guys like Adams are pass catchers that we wanted to target in the past as volume target guys. I don't know if you see this as the matchup to necessarily do it. I do think we have more question marks about wide receiver this week than other weeks, but Adams is coming off another 13 target game, 8 for 119 last week. Where does he rate for you in terms of pay up options at wide receiver. We have him as the 4th overall wide receiver projected right now. Probably ends up trending up to 3rd at least, would be my guess by the time it's all said and done. Where does he land for you in terms of just safety for cash games?
Yeah, I mean, him being in that 3rd to 4th range in terms of overall projection sounds about right to me. Adams is an interesting guy that I've written up at prior points in the season when opportunity was opening itself up in Green Bay, because he is one of those guys that can definitely fill in as the short pass as the new run situation when things break right. He's got, let's see, averaging more double-digit plus, averaging 11 or more targets in his last 5 games. That's got to be among the highest in the league. He had a stretch earlier in the season where he had a 3-game stretch where he had 14 targets a game. So we know that the plan is to have Adams involved almost regardless of how things are going. And going up against the Jets, you'd have to figure that that's a better matchup than the Bears last week, right? So I wouldn't mind playing Adams, but again, it's just a difficulty of where am I going to get my savings, because I can't play. We talked about Zeke, we talked about Chubb, we talked about Marlon Mack. It's really hard to play all 3 of those guys and fit a high-end wide receiver. So I think that's why I'd be leaning away from it. But if he wound up, if we decided that Jamal Williams was the play and we had Adams, I would love to play him in cash.
Yeah, I think I pretty much land right with you. When I said he was ranked that, I have him on FanDuel. He's actually 2nd overall on DraftKings in terms of projection.
PPR.
Yeah, and it really matters because he's just such a beast in just full PPR mode. On the Jets side, they are going to be without an unknown. Again, he sat out last week. Robbie Anderson, kind of a guy that's cropping in and around DraftKings at 4,500. Maybe on FanDuel as well. I need to go double check that, but. Robbie Anderson, not usually a guy that I want to play in cash, but it's hard to ignore the target share that he's had, at least over the short term. He's had some decently targeted games. They always seem like they're going to be a little more volatile than I want them to be, especially with the downfield stuff. But how do you feel about a possible Robbie Anderson cash game play this week?
I was muting myself. I don't mind Robbie Anderson. I actually wrote him up for cash games this week. I think Anderson, he's the type of guy that if you look at the whole season, you're going to see like many different Robbie Andersons. But I think since Darnold took over, the plan generally has been to give him around 7 targets a game. We know that he's got upside for 11, like we saw last week against Houston, and the probably downside for 5 or so that we saw against New England still exists as well. I do think you'll probably want to go down a little bit at some position somewhere in order to be able to pay up for all those fancy objects that you like, So it's like you're doing your Christmas shopping here. Robbie Anderson is that week of ramen noodles that allows you to get your new big screen TV, So
did you think about that ahead of time, or did you just come up with that right now?
I just came up with that off the top of my head, believe it or not. In spite of being frazzled from muting myself by accident and embarrassing myself.
Green Bay is a bottom 3rd defense on the season. They're not good. This is and if you think that if you think the Jets are playing from behind at all, I mean, obviously New York, we'll have to check some weather stuff leading into lineup block as we get into the wintertime months. But in general, I don't mind it. He's coming cheap, and he's just, again, you need to be prepared for a Robbie Anderson 5 target, 2 catch, 22-yard kind of game, because he's just not a possession receiver in the way that he gets. That's not how he gets his fantasy points, but he's got huge upside, no doubt about it. And he's got the kind of guy that can appear in GPP winning lineups. He has a 3 catch for 123 and 2 touchdown game. He's coming off of 96 yards, 7 catches and a touchdown game. These are, at these price points, these are the kind of things that start trending you up toward the top of GPPs, and you just need to be able to prepare yourself to kind of like live with the downside. All right, let's roll through. Minnesota goes in and plays Detroit. Minnesota starts as a 4.5-point road favorite, now up to 6. We saw a Dalvin Cook complete and utter chalk week last week where he basically paid it off. 6-point road favorites is not as good as home, but still you like where he's landing in terms of just like the implied points. He's coming off a 19 carry, 136 yard and 2 target game. We did not discuss him on cash games, and I'm wondering if we should. I mean, a lot of things seem to like line up to have Dalvin Cook as a play again this week, and he's just not projected as high as we have some other guys, but still only 7,100 on FanDuel. Where do you land on Cook here?
It's actually not a matter of projection for me. Like, I think we probably like him about as much as we did last week. It's more of a price question. The reason he was chalk on FanDuel last week is because he was $800 cheaper than this. That's a 12% roughly increase in price, and that's just a lot. Like, that's just a lot of price to add to your salary. And if you look at the past game log, yeah, like he can kind of get there, especially if you squint and you're doing PPR type stuff. It can come together for you. But yeah, I think for me, again, we just have, like, if I'm going to compare him to Marlon Mack, he's basically the same guy as Marlon Mack in my mind, and Mack is cheaper, and I think just better. I think he's not dissimilar to Nick Chubb almost. except for Nick Chubb is like a safer version of Dalvin Cook to me. So that's kind of where I land with him right now.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of there as well. I think it's going to be interesting to see where ownership lines up because Cook was such a heavily owned guy last week and was so good. And that is just something that can translate on a week-to-week basis. Again, their implied points are pretty high. And now they did split carries a little bit more than I thought they were going to last week. They were winning. So that helped. Cook had 42 snaps. Latavius Murray had 27 snaps. Latavius Murray did carry the ball 15 times and was in there for series. Like this wasn't just all garbage time run for Murray. He was in there for a couple series in the first half as well. So that would be the one thing I'd be a little concerned about, especially too if the game starts going completely downhill for them and they're not going to overextend Cook in a way that like the Colts might with Marlon Mack. So that's probably where I end up landing. And then we had the receivers for Minnesota, guys that we spent a lot of time talking about early in the season, Thielen specifically, and then to a lesser degree, Diggs. And then Thielen's coming off a 2-target week. Diggs saw the targets was 7. I mean, are we just completely off the Adam Thielen is cash game viable, is even GBP viable at this point with the way that his usage has gone in the short term? It's just dropped off a cliff from where we were kind of discussing him earlier in the season.
Yeah, I think they've found a lot of comfort in passing to the running back, and that's just how a lot of teams are operating these days. I think other teams have realized they can probably scheme for Thielen and deny him some of that just free stuff he was getting underneath early in the season. And at this point, sure, these guys are definitely still big tournament opportunity guys. Like, we know Diggs has the 18 target game in him, right? I mean, we know that there are game scripts where the opponents give it to him, where the Vikings will give the ball to Thielen 15 times. It's just you can't rely on it on a week-to-week basis in the same way that you could early in the season. So, I'm not going to touch him for cash for sure, but for big tournaments, why not?
I think if you think that, Diggs sees the Darius Slay treatment here and Thielen is just all of a sudden just has more opportunity because of that, this could be a bounce back week in terms of just GPP. I think he'll be off most people's radars because of that. And if the price is down to where he is, let me just look real quick on FanDuel. Yeah, he's like the 10th most expensive wide receiver, probably where he should be based on the short-term production. But if you think that Diggs gets shut down in a bad shadow cover matchup, then I think you could see a bounce back here for Thielen. And I'm with you. I would not trust it for cash games. And then on the Detroit side, Kenny Galladay is coming off a big game. He's questionable. I'm hard pressed to see anything I like here except for maybe the Vikings defense.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I land too. Again, Galladay, a guy, he's shown it that he can do it for you in big tournaments. I think if he can turn 8 targets into 146 yards, we know he has the 15 and 13 target weeks when the opportunity first opened up. It's doable, but not for cash.
And remember, the Vikings, the last time these two teams played each other, it was the game the Vikings just sacked Stafford every single time. They had something like 11 sacks that game.
It was 10 sacks, I think.
Something crazy. Yeah. So I'm not going to translate that performance onto this one because that was an outlier performance. But even independent of that,
we know that they were able to do something, though, right? And I think for that reason, if you wanted to go there defensively, no one would blame you.
Moving into a game that actually had some news come out here late in the afternoon, or early in the afternoon yesterday. Bills go in and play the Patriots. Josh Gordon now suspended indefinitely for another violation of the league substance abuse policy. I'm not going to get into the right or wrong of that piece. Just to say he's not going to play this week. So I'm going to leave it at that, and we're going to figure out where we land from a DFS perspective on the remainder of the Patriots team. The Patriots have 29 implied points, which is among the highest, if not the highest of the day as I scroll through this. Big favorites here, 13.5-point favorites against a Bills team. I ticked up Edelman Edelman was a guy that was kind of in and around cash game projections for us. And on the Gordon news, I gave him like half a target more. One, do you think that's reasonable? Do you think that we just see just a little bit more of Edelman here to make him cash game viable? Because he's a guy that's right now, especially from a PPR standpoint, coming in like 60% of our overall top lineups, especially on DraftKings, and maybe even a little more on FanDuel.
Yeah, I liked Edelman before the news. I think he's just an underrated source of targets. I think, Buffalo being a tough matchup is kind of whatever to me. New England still has something to play for. I think he's the one guy, reminds me of like when Wes Welker was there, where if the Patriots need 11 yards, like he's going to be the guy they turn to. Gronk is a shell of his former self. I don't think they believe in their running game or their passing to the running game to get that kind of yardage when they need it. And again, the Patriots are just like running the risk of having a much worse situation for the playoffs than they probably feel like they deserve. So yeah, Edelman I think is coming up on being an every lineup guy for me right now.
Yep, I gave little ticks up to James White out of the backfield. He's a pass catcher that they've shown a willingness to sort of trust in terms of the passes the new run kind of thing. They're big favorites here, so Sonny Michel has to be in consideration. They just played a lot of different running backs, so that's the only issue there. Cordell Patterson, he saw 3 targets last week, and they were directly near the end of the game, which I don't know if that was signaling that they I read something that the Patriots kind of knew this was coming down the pike, and maybe were even informed during the game that this was something that had happened with Gordon, because they took Gordon off the field and ran Cordell Patterson out there for some final series. So I don't know if that just means, because like one thing we've learned with wide receivers this year is sometimes the guy whose role is unchanged is these situations don't change much for them. And then the guy who is going to step in for that guy, that's actually the person that we want to see the most. See the Broncos, see some of these other teams where this has happened this year, the Giants to some degree. I don't know, Cordell Patterson, worth a GPP dart if you think that he's going to be the guy lining up here, or is that like just maybe too deep of a pull?
No, it doesn't seem outrageous. I mean, Patterson, though, he checks the box of a guy who's already somewhat involved in the offense. He was getting 2 to 3 targets a game. Obviously, Gordon and Edelman do very, very different things. I guess the only fly in the ointment of this play would potentially be the Patriots don't seem to feel like they need to have that long ball sort of thing going on in any given game. Like sometimes they do it more often to Gordon, and then sometimes it just wouldn't be there at all, and they would just rely more on the underneath stuff. So I think he's really, really cheap. I think if you heard he was starting, I would put him in lineups just to see what else I could get for my money. But I don't feel like I would absolutely need to either, because the Patriots, more than any other team that I've watched since we've been doing this, are also just like happy to have it be some guy you've never heard of step in, and even guys that you have heard of, like Chris Hogan. Like there's no telling to me that Patterson, it would be a 1-to-1 thing where Patterson would just step in and inherit all of those Josh Gordon targets.
The Buffalo Bills went into last week. I think by the halftime of the game, they had no running backs left on the roster. McCoy and Ivory were already out. Ford and McKenzie both got hurt, and they were just out. It was all the running backs. McCoy and Ivory are coming back to play this week. I'm not sure it totally matters here. You want to dream on a Josh Allen scrambling around kind of thing. He has been able to do it in the past in terms of just getting like a raises floor fantasy wise, because he just isn't all that good of a thrower, and then just goes out and rushes for the 101 and 135 and 99 yards in a game. He's been decent from a fantasy perspective. Did connect with Robert Foster last week, so I guess a GPP. If you want to take the Patriots run game a little bit or an Edelman kind of short pass thing and dream on Josh Allen, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. And I'm hard pressed to find. There's definitely no safety in it. You can also probably consider the Patriots defense here. Buffalo only 15.5 implied points. Falcons go in and play the Panthers. Obviously, the big news here: Cam Newton's been shut down for the season. That line shifted immediately. Panthers have been 2.5-point home favorites now. Back to the Falcons as 3-point road favorites. Still not an overwhelming look here for the Falcons in terms of they're playing the backup quarterback and sort of barely favored on the road. We did talk about Tevin Coleman. What about guys like Julio? Have put it together, especially with the touchdowns of late. The late season Falcons not playing for really much of anything here, but except for pride. Do you think that's enough to get big games out of some of their key offensive guys like Julio Jones, like Tevin Coleman?
Yeah, I think we talked about Coleman. I think that's a reasonable gamble at this point. I would pay very, very close attention and really want to be sure that the plan was to have Coleman be the main guy on FanDuel, where the $6,400 price tag is a little bit more prohibitive for me, just the way lineups wind up looking when you play him on FanDuel versus when you play him on DraftKings. Or maybe put differently, I don't know that I'm really getting a lot for my savings, so I feel like I'm taking on a little bit of additional risk knowing that the Falcons are happy just to have that game where he has 12 carries and someone you've never heard of, maybe it was Ito Smith or whoever in the past, comes in and gets the share of the carries that you weren't anticipating. But Julio Jones, again, he's in that Davante Adams group of guys that I'd like him. I wouldn't be concerned if he were in my lineup, but I don't think I'd go out of my way to prioritize it. He wasn't that great when they played Carolina early this season. I think I'd rather play Adams on its face, even though he's got a pretty good matchup here against Carolina. I just don't think for cash games it's going to be where I wind up landing.
What about thoughts on McCaffrey without Cam? Do you think it just hurts McCaffrey too much to not have Cam there? I mean, McCaffrey's been amazing, so been.
It can't help, I guess, is my general sense, right? He has a great relationship with his current quarterback, and losing him isn't great. I mean, I'd like to think that anyone in the NFL who's just on an NFL roster can make the types of passes that Cam makes to McCaffrey. It's not like especially complicated routes. It's more like finding McCaffrey in space in sort of a planned way and letting him do his thing. And sometimes when the play breaks down, they can go to him too. But I think, I think McCaffrey's a good play, solid play. I'd rather play Zeke for 500 less. I don't know that I can play both, but again, in the upside, even the high floor territory, I think he's a good play.
I think you can consider the Falcons defense here against a backup quarterback that doesn't have much in the way of wide receiver weapons too.
Sure. Yeah.
So, the Falcons right now, we have them as the 5th highest points per dollar defense on the week on FanDuel. Now that we don't have them for an overwhelming amount of points, but the fact that they're 3,400 and they're playing a guy who's barely taken any NFL snaps does strike me as a spot where you could probably take advantage. Again, understanding that, I mean, I guess I think about it, the Panthers actually do have like a little something to play for. The Falcons don't. But again, if you're playing for pride and they're not at risk of like going and trying to get that number 1 seed overall, so I don't see why they wouldn't just have something like a max effort game here. All right, let's keep moving here. Bengals go in and play the Browns. Browns huge 10-point favorites at home. Bengals been decimated by injury. I had said Tyler Boyd was going to be out yesterday on the podcast, but I guess I was incorrect. He's just questionable to play. But basically the rest of their team is out. Obviously they already lost Dalton. Andy Reid's not going to be there. They're essentially left with a team of Jeff Driscoll, Joe Mixon, and then whatever poo-poo platter of wide receivers they could throw out there in addition to Boyd. And then you have the Browns we talked at length about Nick Chubb yesterday. Any thoughts here? I mean, Mixon's coming off a huge week. We've seen the willingness to just give him the ball a lot, even in maybe not ideal situations. Is this a spot where you could take like a GBP upside plan? Because Mixon's one of the few very elite volume guys that it's running into such a deficit here, probably in terms of points.
Yeah, I think that's like you probably hit the nail on the head there. I think on the Cleveland side, I think Nick Chubb just looks like, the more and more I looked at it, you kind of brought him up as a cash game play. And at first I was like a little bit less enthused, but I think the floor that he brings even to the bad game scripts and the potential ceiling that I don't know that we've even seen unleashed yet. I mean, we saw an excellent game against Atlanta, but he could score 3 touchdowns in a game at some point. He could, have 200 total yards in that same game. And I think the floor is also high enough to where I feel pretty solid about it. I also think, I was curious to know what you think about Jarvis Landry. I mean, the guy just still is kind of getting the targets, still hasn't done much with it. He's also kind of cheap. Is it just like, I mean, the game log is kind of grisly with him, but 2 of the last 3 weeks we've seen him top 8 targets. Can we consider him in a game where we can be somewhat confident that things won't be weird for Cleveland, or is it just not worth the effort?
I just don't think it's worth the effort. I think it just doesn't do it. 8 targets, 3 catches for 37 yards. He had the 100.
So what's the right number of targets on Landry? I guess is a good question.
7.5 probably.
Yeah, okay.
Like I'll look where I have him, but
No,
my guess is something like that number. I typed in the wrong thing. This is a good pot. That's I searched for something in our database. Yep, exactly 7.5. So I was right. I have 7.5 targets. That seems correct to me. I don't want to go take him to like 8.5, where that would maybe start putting him into consideration. There's no evidence that that's going to be the case. And the conversion issues are just an issue too. Like he just doesn't do anything with these. You look for these guys that want to do stuff after the catch. We just have years now of just evidence that Landry catches the ball and just doesn't do another single thing with it, even when he does catch it. So I just don't. I'm not seeing it. It's kind of just all Nick Chubb here for me in this game. Again, maybe the Browns D, because this Bengals offense is just total garbage. Browns D at 3,000 on DraftKings is getting up there in price, but could be worth it for a team that, I don't know, is going to really struggle to put up points. I don't see. They've struggled against bad defenses to do it, and the Browns are not a bad defense. You do have to pay for it, though. 3,000 on DraftKings, 4,400 on FanDuel. Cowboys host the Bucks. Zeke's the other one we talked about a ton. We talked about Dak. We talked about Cooper. I don't think we need to really rehash it here. Would you be comfortable in a situation of just chucking all 3 of those guys back into cash games this week, coming off the shutout? I think outside of Zeke, I think we might be on the opposite side of the – we might be getting them lower owned again, because a team that gets shut out can just get shut out. But still, this is the Tampa Bay defense. We talked about it a lot, but just get some of the quick thoughts here on the Cowboys offense.
Yeah, I think the quick thoughts on the Cowboys offense are that they're just probably great plays, and I think you're getting them at a slight discount to what you would have to pay if they were really good last week against Indy. They weren't. I think that will scare some people off them. The more I'm looking at quarterback this week, I find it harder and harder to believe that people won't go to Dak. I think I have forecasted, I've done a bad job of giving the community, the DFS community, credit sometimes when how much I think they're going to overreact to news. But I think in the modern DFS cycle, people will be able to look at Dak's broader body of work, and especially the consistency he had been bringing recently, especially since the arrival of Cooper. And I suspect he'll be the highest owned quarterback. I think I was wrong about that last week. I think I forecasted Jackson in a similar spot, and that didn't wind up coming to fruition completely, but he was the best. So I don't know. I like all these guys. We're just going on and on. They're obvious plays in my mind, and some people will fade them, but probably to their own detriment.
Yep, I think that's kind of where I land too. I think that it helps that just the price didn't come up again. I don't mind actually going back to Michael Gallup again, in terms of just as an upside GPP play. I know that he didn't see any targets last week, but my guess is if nothing else, that will be the outlier game. And I'm not going to play him in cash like I was sort of more willing to do last week. But I don't want to completely overreact to the guy. Still played every offensive snap. It just the matchup just wasn't there. It just wasn't happening in terms of how we're doing it. You're getting a much better opportunity for him on the from Tampa Bay. So from a GPP standpoint, definitely a guy I'll have in GPPs again. I'm not going to overreact from an upside perspective on the 0 targets. Tampa Bay, I mean, anything to see here. Jameis, this is another game where you can tell teams that have something to play for, the teams that don't. 20 implied points here for the Bucks. Dallas has been a very good defense. Anything that you like, maybe from an upside perspective, especially if you're going to play Dallas a little heavier than some other teams.
Yeah, I think it's funny when you look at the Bucks over the course of the season. Like their offense has always had that little paper tiger feel to it, where it's like, really, Ryan Fitzpatrick 400 yards, really, like Jameis comes in off the bench and goes like whatever 16 for 20 for a million yards, like. And I think I still like, and it was interesting to look at them too, because it was like they don't really have any like new parts. Like you're really just kind of counting on big improvements from guys like Fitzgerald and Jameis that we haven't seen in the past. I think I'm still not that excited about the Bucks, but I could see a very strong case for doing a correlation play. Like maybe you take, say, Jameis and Godwin, on a whim, and then you take Zeke going the other way, or maybe you take Dak and Cooper and you take a couple of the Tampa Bay wide receivers going the other way, right? Like I think there's funny things you can do for big tournaments here. I don't know if you want to be sticking your neck out investing in this offense for cash though.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. And this seems like a week of haves and have-nots. You're seeing a lot of lines, a lot of teams that are implied for under 20 points, which is just sort of rare at this point. I mean, that's going to be sort of rare for the NFL in general, but it really speaks to teams being injured, teams kind of being out of it, not a lot to play for. You're going to start to see some of these implied points just trending lower and lower as motivations for teams dwindle. Another one of these games is the Jacksonville Jaguars going in and playing the Dolphins. Jags imply for 18 points. They're out of it. Dolphins kind of still in it here in terms of the playoff picture. They, I believe, are 8-8 right now. So they're 7-7, which puts them in the hunt for the wild card in the AFC. So it's reflected in the line where they're 4-point favorites. Frank Gore out for the season. Kalen Ballage is the one that got the majority of the carries in Gore's absence last week. And I read a little bit more about this, and they said it spoke to Kenyon Drake's just inability to figure out pass protection schemes, and like just the sort of routes and runs that they want the Dolphins to make. Because I was trying to answer the question of why doesn't Kenyon Drake just touch the ball more, but that kind of answered it. Ballage is cheap. He broke off a huge run last week. Jacksonville's a bad defense, but I don't know, we're getting 4-point home favorites here with something to play for. Could you make a case for? I'd be hard pressed to do it in cash, but he's 3,700 on DraftKings. Like the guy could carry the ball 14 times. Like I don't know. Like they're kind of favorites at that $3,700 price tag on DraftKings. Have you seen enough from him to have him start maybe creeping into the discussion here?
I don't know. DraftKings will do it too, right? Like they'll just sit it in front of you and say, "Come on, you only need 14 touches to get there on this price, right?" And I wish I, at the top of my head, had like a good study of like how often we've been baited by those guys in NFL and how often it's worked out. Yeah, that's been my feeling too. But it's funny on DraftKings because like, I don't know, I'm looking at FanDuel lineups currently and I have just like guys I can live with at pretty much every position, and I'd be pretty hesitant to introduce this level of uncertainty into my life on FanDuel. But on DraftKings, like when you start to think about being able to get significantly high floor options, I think maybe the PPR makes me feel this way, where like I'm less excited about playing someone like, I don't know, Robbie Anderson, just because I just don't know if he's going to help me out in the PPR perspective. So if I could bump him up to someone like, I don't know, T.Y. Hilton or something, and I had to live with some cheap risks elsewhere, especially like at running back, I feel like I'm more likely to take a risk on a cheap running back on DraftKings because I can get more for my money at wide receiver by doing that, if that makes sense. So I don't know. I can't say I'm super psyched about it, but I could certainly see a case for it.
And would it surprise me for Kenny Drake just to walk out here and be like the the primary back, and this has all been just sort of like a hoodwink kind of job? That wouldn't shock me either. I mean, Kenny Drake still did this is not a great comp because Gore played this game, but Kenny Drake did outsnap Ballage last game, 28-23. Gore only had 7 snaps that game. So
you just hate to see when the guy comes in. Like one thing we've seen in football so many times is when a guy gets hurt and it screws up the first team reps, then just crazy stuff happens, right? Like teams are just totally unprepared for this seemingly every time. No team prepares for an injury, and they probably shouldn't, right? They have limited bandwidth. And they're like, they literally look down the bench and they're like, you put a helmet on and get in there.
Right.
And with a whole week to prepare, I just don't know that you can count on that being the plan again, regardless of how good a guy looked on a per touch basis.
Yep, I think that's where I land. I think there's some GPP stuff for both these guys. By the way, I think you could throw Drake in some GPPs and hope that you get there. He still does catch balls. It still stands to reason he'd be at least like the third down back. The snaps were there, and if Kalen Balazs just entered the game and went the first 2 series and just went 4 carries for 0 yards, is it crazy to think we just see a lot more Kenyon Drake in this game? I don't think it is. And so, from a tournament upside perspective, they're still home favorites here. Jacksonville has all but thrown in the towel for the season. I can make a case for it. I probably, in the more thinking about it, would not do it in cash just because of the existence of Drake. But I think from a GPP standpoint, I think there is definitely a lot to like. Houston goes in and plays the Eagles. Eagles are 1-point home favorites here against the Texans with Nick Foles at quarterback. Foles still coming very cheap. We nodded to him on DraftKings where he's only, I believe, 4,700. Just sum that up real quick. Do we trust Nick Foles enough to know that we're paying almost nothing? He's 1,000 less than Dak, paying almost nothing for him, knowing that extra 1,000 on DraftKings really goes a long way to getting guys into your lineup that you can maybe just trust a little bit more from a low variance position like quarterback.
Yeah, I could see playing Nick Foles, to be honest with you. I wrote him up for the Cash Game article this week. I think I gave you the case yesterday on the podcast too, but I just think he, at his core right now, is a pretty high efficiency passer. I think he's somewhat unlikely to kill you. And I think this season he's run bad on touchdowns. Like I see a guy, especially in the last 2 games that he's played, he's completed 59 of the 79 passes he's thrown. Like, that's good. I don't know what else to say. Averaging 300 yards in those 2 starts. Last season, to finish out the season against the very toughest competition against New England and Minnesota, he averaged more than 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in those games, right? Now, it's a slightly different personnel. I get it, but I think he's a fine play. He's the only guy that gives me pause about playing Dak, because I feel like if Dak's matchup were slightly worse, I would just play Nick Foles and I wouldn't even think twice about it. And I know that that's a high level of confidence for a backup, but he's just not your average backup.
Both these teams definitely have something to play for, so you like to see that out of just a game that this late in the season. Houston 10-4, I would believe, would lock up the AFC South with a win. They're probably going to make the playoffs no matter what, unless it's just a total disaster happens for them. Eagles definitely need to win. They're 7-7, fighting for one of those. Actually, still in the hunt for the NFC East and for definitely in the wild card hunt as well, with the Redskins trending the wrong way. It feels like the Eagles will probably get there, but what you like most about this game is just for sure teams with 2 things to play for. And then you have the Eagles, who just in general, out in their skill positions, just don't offer a ton of safety. Like Josh Adams carried the ball 15 times last week, 28 total yards. He had a touchdown. The running back snaps went an Eagles way again, 24 for Adams, 20 for Wendell Smallwood, 20 for Darren Sproles. So, okay. Good luck figuring out what the plan is going to be with their running game. And then on the Houston side, they kind of have similar issues where the guys have seen basically the same opportunity all season long with really very limited injury issues, and which means that all their prices have trended up to probably where they should be on a week where we're getting value elsewhere. All right, Colts host the Giants. We talked a lot about Marlon Mack yesterday. We talked about Eric Ebron as well, with the Colts 10-point home favorites against New York. Only injury news here. Still waiting on news on Odell Beckham. He's not practiced this week yet. It really seems like he's not going to play. I don't know why they would just force him in there. And again, it's the Giants, and they just do Giantsy kind of things. And so I'm not, especially, I almost think if this was a home game, they'd be more inclined to kind of throw him out there for the fans than Adam. But then maybe he's just like reading into too much.
I don't think that's unreasonable.
We've talked about Marlon Mack as very close to a lock cash game play with this kind of line and the usage he's seen. We talked about Ebron as a bounce back guy. What about Luck? Luck's a guy who's thrown a ton this season, has had some big upside games. Giants defense is bad. The Colts are projected for some of the highest point total of the week. Not a guy we talked about a ton in cash, and yet the guy's been on Luck just pretty damn good this season. What are your thoughts on Luck, or is he just kind of too expensive maybe?
I think there's a few things going on with Luck. I think if you're just going to pay up, it'd be tough to convince me that you would want to play Luck over like Ben Roethlisberger, given the Pittsburgh's injury situation at running back. I think Luck was funny. I mean, he went on an absolute tear. It was like 8 straight weeks with 23 or more fantasy points where he saw like basically no DFS ownership. And then the last 3 weeks, most of that has gone to plaid. I mean, he has just 2 passing touchdowns in the last 3 weeks. This is a crazy stat. So two passing touchdowns in the last 3 weeks. You got that? Prior to that, he had 8 straight weeks with 3 or more touchdowns. So I don't know if we're looking at bad luck, Doug, with Andrew Luck. Yeah, nailed it. Or if there's just something slightly going on. I mean, we know that coming back with shoulder stuff, he was not throwing the ball as far. He was getting this clean bill of health. Having shoulder injuries myself, I always like to compare myself to these NFL guys. Similar, a lot of similarities. If you can see me on YouTube, you'll know I have a lot in common with these guys physically.
Always thought you're an Andrew Luck type when it comes to like just overall
deep
build,
voice, and really tall, metrics. Huge muscles, the whole thing.
Beard kind of trends down the neck a little bit. Yeah, I got you.
But anyway, this is it does right now. I got to get in the shower. It correlates, like Luck's recent lack of doing stuff directly correlates with Marlon Mack's rise, and I wonder to what degree that's like an organizational decision to kind of maybe preserve some of this arm for the playoffs, or if maybe that Jacksonville game was a little sobering for them. I mean, he threw 52 times in that game and did stone cold nothing against Jacksonville. So I don't know. I don't know what to make of Luck right now. I still did write him up, right? Not to him anyway, in the Cash Game article as a guy you could consider. I think if you were going to play someone at his price range, you'd be doing it for the high floor. And given it that we haven't seen that in 2 of the last 3 weeks, I don't know if you want to go for it this week either.
T.Y. Hilton's another guy that's coming very close to, especially on DraftKings. It's still 7,100. He had 8 targets in the game last week where they barely even had to throw the ball because they were just running down. They only threw the ball 27 times. He had 8 targets, so you really, really love that target share. He was also, he still was kind of fine for 5 for 85. And if you watch the game, he was so close to this being like 7 for 150 and a touchdown. I'll say a touchdown and a half because he basically dropped or was overthrown on 2 or 3 of them. So I know you can't score half a touchdown, but I'm just trying to say where probably the median line would be on what this game almost was for him. Because he doesn't get there, the price doesn't really move. So I think it's 7,100, knowing especially on DraftKings, if you're getting a Marlon Mack at 5,500 and you're getting a Tevin Coleman at 4,800, now all of a sudden you can kind of start trending up to the 7,000 tier for cash games. And the Julian Edelman, T.Y. Hilton stack is actually pretty close for us for cash games. And I wouldn't be shocked to have it just kind of end up be the case. I'm pretty damn high on T.Y. Hilton in this game. And again, the Colts are another one of these teams. Like, they kind of have to win. They're 8-6. The AFC wildcard race is very tight right now. So this is, I hate to say the word must-win game, but this does check that kind of box here for the Colts. Giants, we'll see with Beckham. Maybe Sterling Shepard kind of shows up. We talked about Evan Ingram yesterday. You want to take a risk on Barkley because you think that you're just going to run him into the ground and give him all the carries. Worst things that have happened in GBP. And no one is going to own that guy this week, knowing how big of an underdog they are. All right, going into the 4 o'clock games, Rams go and play the Cardinals. Rams 16-point favorites here. That line started at -14 and is up to -16 as the Cardinals are just awful. Gurley is questionable and has not practiced all week and says that he's going to play. And I wonder where we land here. Well, I guess he's going to play, and it's just hard to imagine they run him a lot. And I just don't even know what other crazy options they have at running back here. This is a very weird situation here for the Rams. Do you think that we just see, because we're pretty high on the wide receivers, do you think we see Gurley banged up and they maybe try to throw the ball a little bit more here? Because the running back situation is I think Malcolm Brown's on the IR. I don't even know who their backup is. I'll look this up as you're talking, but give me some of your thoughts on the Rams here who are expected for a lot of points.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I guess Justin Davis, he's someone who has had a carry in each of the last 2 games, 1 carry. So I don't know if that qualifies.
I'm showing John Kelly as the next guy up. I'll look this up, but yeah. I mean, you can't trust these guys, right? I don't know.
Kelly was the other guy. He got 2 carries last week. I don't know who you want to trust. I would imagine it would be a timeshare if Gurley were to miss for whatever reason. I can't say I'm super psyched about playing the passing game here. I think, Josh Reynolds was the target leader last week and still didn't do a whole lot with it, even on a $5,300 price tag on FanDuel. Woods is the guy we perennially want to dream on. I think I might like Cooks, but the tough matchup with Peterson here makes it dicey to me. I know right now this is awkward to say because if you're actually a DFSR subscriber and you pay for access to our tools right now, these guys have been in and out of the top lineups all week long. And I'm just having trouble making heads or tails of a number of things. The first is what the plan will really be in this game. Will they come out and try to establish the run with Gurley? Will they even bother? I don't totally know. I get that they're still battling for home field advantage. I don't know how much that exactly matters to them. I would imagine they certainly want that first round bye, though, and with Chicago still lingering. I mean, if they could have just won any of the last 2 weeks or Chicago had lost, I feel like it would be a no-brainer. Like they'd be just sitting Gurley and moving on with their life. But I just can't say with any great degree of certainty what the plan is right now.
Yeah, I think that's the only thing that makes me trust this Woods situation even just a little bit. And I get that, like, I get about being skeptical about it. But so if you're looking at how they roll Patrick Peterson around, they do kind of split they split him out on the edges, and they never bring him into the slot. Woods runs 54% of his routes from the slot. So I think he'll fully avoid.
Is that on the season or is that with Cup out?
That is on the season.
Right. So you would imagine it's gone up since Cup has gone down, right?
Yes, exactly. They've moved him. Right. That's exactly what they've done. They moved him into the slot more. They range these guys all around, by the way. So it's like they more than other teams. They'll run these guys all into different formations. That McVay kind of has. But either way, he's going to primarily run out of the slot here. He has one of the best multipliers that we have in our system for an individual wide receiver right now. So he is just looking at like a 5 or 6% upgrade over league average, just matchups that you're going to see. I think I feel okay about it. I kind of even, again, feel a little bit better about it because of the Gurley thing. And this game could be over at halftime. Like, I just don't know. So that's my
last time they met. Those of you will recall in week 2, the Rams won 34-0, and they were up 19-0 at halftime.
Cardinals are terrible,
and it was a complete embarrassment of a game. Cooks did go 7 of 9 for 159 yards in a game where he didn't really need to do anything in the second half. So, I get it. It's a good matchup. They killed this team in the past. They should do whatever they want on offense, and you better hope that you guess right in terms of who gets the production.
All right, 2 more games to go here for the 4 o'clock. Chicago goes and plays San Francisco. Chicago 4-point home favorites against the 49ers. I'm not seeing a ton that I love here on either side of the ball. It's really tough to run any guys into the Chicago defense from a DFS perspective on anything more than a short slate, and even then it's tough. And then Chicago, they're just the way they run the ball. Howard runs it, doesn't get anything in the past. You're kind of dreaming on touchdowns for him. Outside of maybe just the Bears defense, but again, you're paying for them. Anything that you like here, and then we'll get into the Steelers and Saints.
Yeah, I don't really love any part of this game. I think the Niners are kind of ruled out based on a tough defensive matchup. Chicago doesn't really bring anything offensively, and to your point, they're just really expensive on defense, and that's one thing we basically haven't done all season is pay up a defense, and I won't be starting this week.
All right, final game, and it has a lot to discuss here. The Steelers go in and play the Saints. The Saints right now are 5.5-point favorites. But I'm going to start on the Steelers side with the injury stuff. So one, James Conner was listed questionable, but if you read the quotes from him, it really does not sound like he's going to play. Like, he has not practiced all week, and he kind of in his last quote said, I'm close, but I'm just not ready. So that was Thursday afternoon. He says this after practice. We'll see. Today's Friday at 11:30. We'll see what happens today during practice. That to me did not sound like a guy who's going to go full pad practice. So, and then the other thing is, during practice yesterday on Thursday, JuJu Smith-Schuster left the game, left practice with a groin injury. This is leaving practice is a bad sign. Now, we have no definitive news. Maybe he just tweaks it and they're just kind of playing it safe. Typically, though, when you leave practice with an injury, you leave practice because you're injured. Like, I don't have any definitive news on it.
That's
but
a really good take, though.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just mostly mean that, like,
right. It's not like, oh, we're going to limit this guy because just to rest him, like they did.
No, this is a new injury. This is what I mean. It's like, that's mostly what I mean. This is not something that was a problem before, and it is a new injury. And new injuries can be something that go away the next day, or they can be problematic. We're going to learn a lot about the Steelers here, I think, from Friday and Saturday's kind of practice and news cycle. I'm going to feel pretty good about saying that Connor is not going to play and Jalen Samuel is going to get all the snaps here. So let's start with him. He's coming off a week, obviously, that he looked like the Steelers just can kind of run out anybody at running back, and the guy's going to be pretty effective. 19 carries, 142 yards. Did see 2 targets. Outsnapped Stephen Ridley 39-6. The fact that he's playing on all downs, independent of game script, the Saints are a good defense. Where would you slot Samuel? The price has come up, but where do you slot him among some of the other running backs that we've talked about so far here?
Yeah, I think it's hard to make a case that Samuel isn't a good play. I mean, he's coming into this game with a super high total. I think we've seen him now. They used him hardcore in the running game last week against New England, which is what I had concerns about. He's very effective. They didn't need to use him as much in the past, but when they have gone to him in the past, the guy's converted his last 12 targets into quick math, 114 yards. So that's a really effective option in the passing game as well. It does look like they've kind of leaned on him as the guy in terms of, being a somewhat reliable 3-down back, really touched the ball just 3 times last week, and importantly, no targets in the passing game once again. So, yeah, I like Samuels a lot. I think if we had definitive James Conner news, I could see a case for playing him over Marlon Mack. So,
wow, I don't think I'd go there, but it's interesting that it's even a discussion.
I think it's a discussion. Or Nick Chubb or one of these guys. Like, I think he's cheap enough, and you're starting to get enough savings that it could make a material difference.
He's 1,200 more than Mack on DraftKings. We have Mack's projected right now. I bumped Samuel back to full touches. We have Mack projected for just a little bit more. And then on FanDuel,
on FanDuel he's cheaper than Mack. I guess that's the point I was making. Oh, sorry, I didn't even see the DraftKings price. I assumed it was tracking the same way.
It's interesting. This one will be one to discuss. I don't know. I think the Smith-Schuster thing is going to be a big one too. So let's. I'm not going to just go out and assume he's going to be out, but let's just nod to it really quick, just in case he is, because we're not doing another podcast before I Twitch stream. If JuJu plays, I think he's probably in a good spot. But if JuJu's out, what do we want to do with targets? Like, you can't go totally crazy on a guy like Antonio Brown. But Eli Rogers did jump back in.
I was going to say Eli Rogers. I think you could see him slide into that role again. He was effective on those 4 targets. I think you could bump Antonio Brown. New Orleans is kind of funny because they have this really divergent set of numbers where they can be tougher on wide receiver ones than they can be on, the guys downstream from them. James Washington's been another guy. He's got now 5 straight weeks with 3 or more targets, and he hasn't been very good, but you'll at least know he's out there. And
one thing about him real quick before we move on, he did outsnap Rodgers 44-28 last week. James Washington.
That's what I mean. So, and I don't know if they, again, it's not always a one-to-one thing with wide receivers. Like, a lot of times teams are looking for a guy who will do something similar to the guy who's going out, right? So you'll pay attention to it. It kind of stinks that it's a 4:25 game. We just might not know before the game starts. Pittsburgh definitely is going to want to put their best foot forward here with the playoff situation right now, with Baltimore breathing down their neck as they've they pulled themselves out of it a little bit last week with the Patriots win, but they're still not out of the woods yet. So you're going to want to definitely keep a close eye on this one and try to figure out who's going to play and who's not.
And this is finally the final thought here on the Saints. It depends what the Saints' motivations here. They're obviously home favorites. They are 12-2 and have already clinched the division. They are nearly locked for a home field bye or first round bye. With the Bears, kind of like they're 2 games up on the Bears, and I'm not sure who owns the tiebreaker there. So, because the reason I mentioned this is because I kind of love Kamara in this spot.
But they could lose it to LA though too, right? They're only 1 game up on LA. So
yeah, but I'm saying for the first round bye. Now home field advantage.
For the first round bye, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So for home field advantage, they're in the driver's seat for that as well, and I think they would clinch it with a win here. But I don't know all the tiebreakers. But I was just gonna say about Kamara. I think this is a great spot to play Kamara in terms of you're going to get very low ownership on him, I believe, based on like having to pay up for wanting to probably pay up for guys like Zeke just to start and some other great running back options like we've already discussed. That the rest of the industry, these guys aren't going to be lost on the Marlon Macks and Tevin Coleman's and Nick Chubbs of the world. But Kamara, especially on DraftKings, Kamara is way cheaper than these guys. Like he's the same price as Chubb. We actually have him projected for slightly more than Nick Chubb there at 21.64 and on way less touches because his touches are just worth a lot more. He's coming off a 14 rush attempt, 9 target game last week. I think I like Kamara as like one of my top just overall GPP targets, and I'm actually wondering how much people will even talk themselves into him in cash just because of home favorites, kind of probably wanting to win, great implied total. Give me some quick Kamara thoughts here before we get out of here.
Yeah, an interesting GPP play. Not where I would land for cash by any means. I just think why? Like when there's a guy who can get the big target share games, but also can, not turn it into much production, even in solid matchups. You just got a long stream of games where he was scoring like 10 to 14 fantasy points a game. Really cool upside. Definitely don't mind him from that perspective. I feel like I can do better in cash though.
Yep, I think I'll land there too. But I do like the Michael Thomas of the world, especially if Pittsburgh keeps it close and they want to, and the Saints just are really looking for that win. I do think there's a lot of GPP upside on the Saints. That's not going crazy to say that. I just think the ownership on them will be a little lower than expected. All right, we're gonna get out of here. DFSR.com/deals. We'll get you started on our projection system. Optimal lineups for FanDuel and DraftKings, NFL, NBA. It's all NHL. It's all covered under one subscription package. So go check that out, buddy. Enjoy your Week 16 in the NFL.
Will do. All right, YouTube people, thanks for coming along for the ride. We noticed that our viewers have doubled an astounding doubling. If this rate continues, we'll be the most watched YouTube channel in a matter of months. So thanks for coming along. We do appreciate your time. As always, you can subscribe to see more videos in the future, or follow along over at DFSR.com, where we're providing written content, oral content, and now video content too. So just all the content your heart could desire. See ya.